Hey guys, it's Public bringing you another video about Shadow Priest inside of Shadowlands. In today's video, I'm gonna go on a little bit of a rant and just talk about what Shadow is still missing going into Shadowlands that's preventing it from being possibly the best spec that's ever been in the game. Alright, it's really close. Let's see what else it needs. Alright, so before I really get into things, I think just clarifying what I want to do in this video, I'm not saying that Shadow's in a bad place by any means. I think it's really close. It's personally the best iteration of Shadow that I've played personally. But I think if we're kind of looking over, okay, we've had a lot of changes so far. What's next? What's left for Shadow that really is kind of preventing it from being that much better? So I'm going to go over all kinds of things in this video that I think are really close to getting there, but I just want to kind of let it all out, breathe out, like all of the things that I think could be different or be better, and let's talk about some ways to fix them, all right? So first things first is I'm going to touch on our legendaries real quick. They've actually done an amazing job updating Shadowflame Prism and Eternal Call of the Void for better iterations for what we asked for. But unfortunately, we still have two other legendaries that have been kind of left in the dust, which is Talbodar's and then Painbreaker Psalm legendary effects. So I think, like, first off, these guys need that same treatment of kind of looking at where they're supposed to fit. What's the viability of them? Are they fun to play? And do they actually, are they meaningful? And I think right now these two don't really fit the mark for that. Painbreaker is okay. Talbodar's really needs some help here. I think there's a few different ways they could do this. The first being Talbodar's need to be more accessible. Give it some kind of interaction more with Mind Blast stuff, maybe something with Dark Thoughts. And Painbreaker Psalm, again, just doesn't fit the bill for what we're looking for. It could work similar to maybe like the Bracers from Legion. Anything really would be better, I think, than what we have now. I've gone over both of these legendaries in detail in previous videos. If you haven't checked out those guys yet, would highly recommend doing so. But honestly, if they can fix these last two legendaries, we have some really awesome... We could, I guess I should say, have some really awesome choices between our legendaries. Right now, it's kind of looking like you're going to use Shadowflame Prism almost all the time with kind of that, niche use cases of Eternal Call of the Void if you kind of want a mix of that single target and AoE damage. So we'll see what happens. Next up, this is probably the biggest thing that I want personally. I'm just sitting here waiting for it. Our Covenant abilities are really boring. Specifically, 3 of them are just not fun to press. They really don't interact with your gameplay whatsoever. Specifically, Kyrian, Venthyr, and Necrolord abilities are kind of just set it and forget it abilities that you use on cooldown. Don't really think about using them, and that's just not fun to play with. They did a really, I think, a decent enough job reworking Night Fade to something that's more usable, interacts with our spec a little bit. Is it the most exciting thing in the world? No, but at least there is some gameplay elements to it, which I do like. I just hope that we have enough time in the expansion to look at the other, before the expansion launches rather, to look at these other 3. At least Necrolord and Kyrian specifically, because those guys you still have to be in melee to use them, and I don't like having to go into melee as a range class. It just feels weird. 8 yards on the minimum range for one of the Kyrian abilities, 15 yards for the other guys. It's really weird to play with, and I hope we have time to address that. I know they've been looking at making Necrolord kind of like an AoE targeted ability, kind of like Dark Void was. We'll see if they get to that. I think that would at least be a great stepping stone up from where we are now, but we'll see what we have time for. Real quickly, I do want to hit on our cooldowns as well. I think, and I've hit on this several times in the video, in other videos in the past, but our cooldowns need a little bit of help in my opinion. I don't know if we're going to have time to address any of these guys, but with Void Form, Power Infusion, and Shadow Fiend or Mindbender, we are kind of all over the place in terms of our cooldowns. Doesn't matter a whole lot because, Shadow Fiend isn't that impactful in and of itself. Power Infusion, we're just going to chain together with Void Eruption all the time. So it's not that big of a deal, but I think to make the spec a bit more holistic, ideally I'd rather see Power Infusion just go away entirely and give us that base haste when we activate Void Form instead of having it be 2 separate buttons. I will say having the utility to cast Power Infusion on others might be an interesting choice, maybe, but I think, as a DPS player, selfishly, I don't like that choice, so I'm going to be a little selfish there, so we'll see what happens. And I think just in general, Shadow Fiend or Mindbender, I was actually advocating for it to be removed before because it's just not that fun to play with in my opinion, but I will say that, with the recent Shadowflame Prism Legendary, it's actually pretty cool, so I don't know what to say about it now. I will say that Legendary is a good interaction, so I like that, but even of itself, without the Legendary, the cooldown's pretty boring, so we'll see what happens. Okay, the next up thing that I want to talk about is our utility. So I think Mythic Plus utility for Shadow Priest is going to be very interesting going into this expansion. We've received a few new things, and I'm curious to see how that has impacted our viability. So we'll see what happens. The biggest things that we got were Power Word Fortitude, right, is now an exclusive buff just for priests. So if you don't have another priest healer in your group or whatever, you don't get that 5% stamina increase. There's no, right now, there's nothing to, like inscription scrolls or anything like that to buff that. So that utility could be actually very useful. We do have uncapped AoE going into this expansion. And we do have Mind Soothe, which might let us do like Shroud type skips depending on the actual route in the dungeon. I haven't seen a whole lot of places where we can use that yet, but who knows where the actual kind of good routes will kind of land with this, so we'll see what happens. But I think like in addition to that, I do just kind of want to highlight some small things that they could tweak to really, I think, give us the kit that we've had in the past that I think we really are kind of looking for again. The main three things I want to talk about is our Mind Bomb stunning again. I really wish they'd bring that back to a stun instead of a disorient. This talent received basically no play at all in terms of BFA from a PvE perspective after they reworked it. And I just don't think it's a healthy place for it to be. I hope they reconsider adding that stun back. In addition, something I've really been advocating for, this is probably the top thing on my list, is our interrupt. So right now Shadow has a baseline 45-second silence interrupt, which can be really strong if you're looking for that silence effect, although the cooldown is kind of long. The problem is that silence effect actually isn't that valuable in a Mythic Plus environment where you typically just want an interrupt rotation because either, maybe mobs can't even be silenced or you just want to lock something down. And this is kind of like where Shadow becomes a burden to the group there. So I'm actually thinking they rework the last word talent. Instead of it just making a flat, you lose 15 seconds duration on silence's cooldown, I think instead if they made it a lowered the cooldown with the talent to 24 seconds, but then remove the silence component to make it more balanced, I think that would be a great talent addition to our kit and really give us that option if there is a dungeon or a specific week where we really need the interrupt with our group comp right now. I can change that and have the same interrupt as a lot of other range specs, make Shadow a bit more competitive for that range spot going into Shadowlands. I think that'd be a huge thing. If they're looking at maybe reworking or giving us other talent options to, change up one of our utility rows, they could also think about giving an augmented Shackle Undead where it works on humanoids, or maybe even some kind of a black hole mechanic that's like Ursula's Vortex, but Shadow Priest themed, something like that. I think this would go a long way in seeing better representation of Shadow Priest inside of Mythic Plus and give a better pugging experience overall. But we'll see what happens, guys. All right, so next up, and this is probably the last large section of the video that I'd like to dedicate to things that they can improve to Shadow that I think are kind of just numbers tweaks more than anything. And this is our talents. So we have a lot of great talents going into Shadowlands. I think we have some of the best talent choices that I've seen so far. However, some of the choices specifically are really lacking, and I think that might hurt our choices right now. So I think there's some numbers soon to do here to actually make it feel really good to play with. So first up, Fortress of the Mind and Twist of Fate are both ideally they're kind of single target talents. Right now they just don't have the numbers compared to the other options, and the sims are telling me that we're rarely ever going to use either of these two options, depending on the build that you've chosen. I think both these guys could use either some kind of a numbers tuning change or a rework or something, because not being able to use Twist of Fate or Fortress in single target kind of defeats the purpose of the choice, I think, so they probably need to buff those guys a little bit. We'll see what happens. I already mentioned the level 35 row and some options they can do to change some of the utility things. And then the last couple three, I just wanted to mention of things that just aren't great to press right now. They are kind of reiterating a little bit here, but firstly, Shadow Crash. They've reworked Shadow Crash. It's not fun to press. I don't think it's great. If anything, they should probably just go back to what it was before, or just think of something new to put here instead. It's not fitting the bill for me personally, but that's just me. Void Torrent right now is really, really struggling. I did a video recently about the change that they've made. They really need to rethink what this guy is for, what the point of this talent is, because as it stands right now, we're probably never going to use Void Torrent, and I don't think that's what they want, so we'll see what happens. And then lastly, I do want to call out that Mindbender here is very, very strong as a talent option. I don't quite know what they want to do to address this, but as it stands right now, guys, Mindbender is so strong, you're hardly in like a PvE rating perspective. You're probably never going to take Damnation or Void Torrent right now, and I don't think that's a healthy spot for a talent. Especially considering something like the Night Fate Covenant does kind of favor Mindbender, and especially with that Shadowflame Prism legendary, heavy favors Mindbender. Yeah, they need to do something here. The easiest thing to probably address this is to actually buff Shadow Fiend itself, inherently making Mindbender less of a gain from that. Shadow Fiend in and of itself is not great. They actually, I think, accidentally nerfed Shadow Fiend a few builds ago, and it only lasts 10 seconds instead of 15. So I don't know if that was intended or not, but it's been there for about a month now, and they haven't fixed it yet. So I don't know if that's intended, but it's making Bender probably way better than it should be. So who knows if we have time to fix it, but I think we should. All right, and the last thing I want to call out before I end this video is we just have some bugs left. I think a lot of these guys are pretty small, so I'm not going to go through each one right now, but between Dark Thoughts or Psychic Links, Death and Madness, that Shadow Fiend duration I mentioned, we all have a kind of a few bugs that can get fixed with the spec and really kind of flesh it out. I'm going to put a link in the description below to a GitHub repo that has details about every issue that we're currently seeing with bugs in terms of shadows, so hopefully they get some eyes on ears on these guys, but I just want to call it out that there are some bugs they could fix and really make Shadow play better. All right, guys? All right, now before I end this video, again, I just want to clarify. I'm talking about all these changes because I think there's some small things they can tweak here to really finish Shadow Priest. It's going to be an amazing spec to play regardless going into Shadowlands. I'm really looking forward to it. So I don't want everyone to be complaining, oh, public, you're just, complaining to complain. You got all this great stuff. Why are you complaining? I think it's still important to give feedback on the stuff that are still kind of plaguing Shadow Priest. So I kind of wanted to call this out. We're going to put a forum post, either myself or other people from the Warcraft Priest team, about all of these changes going on the forum so Blizzard's aware of it. But I kind of want to bring to light some of the things we're still kind of missing or waiting to get changed to make Shadow the best it possibly can be, guys. All right? And before I end this video, I do also want to say a big thank you to all the Patreons that are now supporting me. I'm blown away with all the support, guys. Really, it means a lot. Put the names of the guys that are supporting me at the top tiers. Again, I'm very appreciative. Thank you so much. Hopefully I can use this to get better content out there for you guys that you want to see, especially as we get into the expansion and less stuff is changing. I'm really going to be looking forward to what you guys want to see me cover, things you guys want me to talk about, and all these future content updates. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good one.